Let's go ahead and call our city council meeting to order. Please join me for the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The right screen here. All right, welcome to our city council meeting. I'm going to do a quick review of our meeting agenda tonight before we get started. We will go to public comment. Have we had anybody either in person or online sign up?
No, Mayor, we haven't.
Then Tyler, we don't have any responses to any previous. All right. From there, we're going to go into our consent agenda, which has our city council meeting minutes from our October 16th meeting, as well as the temporary exception to the city manager signing authority for the community campus park construction project. Move ahead to the report from the city manager, the committee and council reports. Again, we'll want to kind of get through that so that we can get to our clear and objective code audit work session at the end of this meeting, where we've wanted to really kind of have a chunk of time for council and planning committee, planning commission members to ask their questions. With that, Jeff, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Councilor Maiden. Present. Councilor Smallwood. Here. Councilor Sheldon.
Oh, he had a call he needed to do. He'll just be a little late.
Okay. Councilor Walker.
Here.
Councilor Exner.
Here.
Councilor Hookinson.
Excused.
Mayor Pulliam.
Here. Thank you. With that, I'll move ahead to propose changes to tonight's agenda. Hearing none, nobody having submitted anything for public comment, we'll move ahead to the consent agenda. Unless there's discussion or questions, I'll entertain a motion to adopt.
Just that I'm going to abstain because that I wasn't at the last meeting.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
She's going to abstain because she wasn't at the last meeting.
I move that we adopt the meeting minutes from.
Well, how about just a consent agenda in its entirety?
Okay, consent agenda entirety, yes.
One question.
We can go to a second and then we'll get into discussions question.
I'll second it.
All right, we're now in the discussion. Is there a question?
Just a question on the purchasing of all the playground equipment and that kind of stuff. We usually, in the past for playgrounds, they're kind of been involvement by the neighbors or other people for pick, Parks Board, all that stuff for picking the stuff. Is that going to still happen?
That is a great question. I don't know if Rochelle's on the call.
She is on the
answer that.
Yep. Rochelle, can you hear us?
I can. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, Kathleen, that it directly, Councilor Walker, directly relates to the public engagement that we've previously done for the play equipment for the community campus park project.
So everything we've done already is kind of
Correct. Yes.
kind of showing the actual structures of what you're going to buy.
Yes, and that's all in the concept in the master plan that we did. And so this is just actually purchasing those pieces of equipment through reciprocal procurement that have already been vetted by the public and input from the public through the design. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. That's all I have.
Mhm.
Great. All right, there has been a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nays. Motion carries. Moving ahead to our report from our city manager, Tyler. We're there.
Yeah, wow, we're there. Caught me off guard. Sorry, man.
I told you I'd be
I
moving
know,
fast.
that just happened real quick. Thank you. So just a couple brief items. The first, we had a tree fall on Tickle Creek Trail Bridge 1. Fortunately, no significant structural damage, but some railing work will need to take place. So it's likely going to be closed for a few days while Parks crew members work on that. No one was hurt, which is great. But damage happens with those trees and wind and rain and everything else. So we'll get to work on that just as quickly as we can. City offices are closed this Friday for Veterans Day. So anyone that's watching, please conduct your city business before Thursday at 5. We have one more week for board and commission applications. They're due this Friday. We have several openings. on several different boards. All that information can be found on our website. But if you know of anyone interested in serving our community, please send them to Jeff to complete the application process. I have a volunteer opportunity tomorrow to help Parks crew clean up all of the glass and debris along the new trail extension from the community campus park down to Sandy River Park. There's always been rumors that was an old dump site. I think we can officially confirm that it is in fact an old dump site. There's a lot of glass and other stuff poking out of the ground. So Rochelle and her crew will be working on getting that area cleaned up and prepped so we can get the new material for the trail installed in the near future. And then last but certainly not least, we have Nellie, our government affairs specialist, on the call to give just a brief update to you. We'll take a couple minutes for that.
Great. Hi, Nellie.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll be very brief. I know you have a lot on your agenda coming forward, but I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to say hello. As you all are likely aware, we are pivoting from our initial water discussion that we were working on during the 2023 legislative session to a $5.9 million wastewater ask, specifically focused on fixing or undoing the housing moratorium. I'm sorry, I have a dog that I'm trying to prevent from barking right now. My husband isn't home. Anyway, so in terms of this ask, we're looking into all of our options at all levels of government. We actually have a meeting with the county coming up next week to see if they have any opportunities for finding some of the financing for that 5.9 million. We also had a meeting with the new Republican leader of the House, Representative Helfrich, last week. Stan and Tyler and I were on that. And he had suggested that House Bill 3414B will come back. For better or worse, it's basically would require local governments to approve certain adjustments to land use regulations for housing developments within the UGB. I know that that's a bill that we were a little bit on the rocks with, and so it's something to keep in mind. I don't think that's necessarily a path forward for us, but we will continue to meet again with our state senator Bonham, state representative Heeb, but then also Vicky Breeze Iverson, the former House Republican leader. She is actually still will remain on the Capitol Construction Committee. So as we meet with her and others, we can hopefully find the best path forward for everyone. Jeff did a wonderful job putting together a one-pager on the wastewater project and the reasoning for our ask, and he deserves mad applause for that. And we also had a conversation. I had a conversation, actually just got off the phone with Representative Bynum, but Representatives Meek and Bynum, not in our district per se, but they're heavily involved in a discussion on repurposing industrial lands. Again, I don't think that necessarily fits our water needs, but it's something to keep on our radar for any future renewals that you're working on. And then last but not least, I've reached out to Earl Blumenauer's office. As you all know, he's retired. Honey, hold on just a second. Sorry. But he, as you all know, Congressman Earl Blumenauer is retiring, but that also gives us an opportunity to maybe potentially find some funds on his way out the door. So that is my quick update. I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's great. Remind me, Representative Helfrich he was talking like there could be money that could also be attached to that bill, correct?
Yes, that is correct. So while we might not like the bill, it might still serve as an opportunity to find some funds. So we're definitely, I've got the bill pulled up. I'm happy to send it to all of you if you would find that useful, but I'm going to find out as much as I can. And we just met with Helfrich last week, so it's been kind of a quick turnaround.
Yeah, please do send that around. That'd be great, Nellie.
Absolutely.
And then the thing I wanted to let everyone know is on the county conversations we've been having, I know we've had talks about kind of the bypass and getting that adopted in their transportation systems plan. There's that, there's the extension, 362nd out, and then was there a third road issue we wanted to talk to them about?
We casually talked about the intersection of Highway 211 and 362nd. Just as the community grows and as
Right.
for future development happens.
So the nice part is that they're actually on the cusp. Kelly reached out and they're just starting their system, their TSP right now, their transportation systems plan. So we're kind of the timing to start getting some of that into their plan worked out really nicely. So
If you're gonna do that, I was just in discussion with a couple different people about Highway 26 and Tenike and Wolf. There's some real problems there. And I guess we're into some legal issues about doing anything significantly different, so with ODOT. So if there was a way-
I would communicate, I would get that in front of Tyler or Kelly sooner
I
than
will do
later.
It's on our TSP, by the way.
Perfect.
And I had lunch with Commissioner West on Friday. We talked a little bit about traffic concerns and bypass and other opportunities for partnership and continuing to work with Clackamas County. So we're kind of hitting everyone in different areas and trying to
Right.
spread our needs and
You
and
tell-
wants across the
Tell
board.
Commissioner West, we expect him to pay for that bypass.
Yeah, I'll let you know how that goes.
All right. Is that your report for tonight?
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, Carl.
Real quick, Jeff, is there a chance of getting a copy of that memo paper that you gave for your discussion on the water ask and all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely.
So we can have some.
Why don't you get
common-
that, why don't you get that sent around to the entire council?
Great idea.
Okay.
That's what I meant. So, okay. I'm gonna keep it real short. I did go the tour with the city manager on the Camp Creek fire, and I will keep it really short in that I saw an awful lot of good and very little bad about what the fire did there. There was a few things of concern a couple years down the road, but really I saw a lot of good things about it. So other than that, I'll keep the rest of my comments to the individuals.
Great, thank you. Kathleen?
I just have a question. Did you guys meet with about the library rent?
We did not. That is November 28th.
Moving on to me. Just a couple things, real fast. One is, the Action Center will be putting on the Tickle Creek Trail
Trick or
Run,
trot.
the Trick or Trot. No,
No,
Turkey
trot.
Turkey Trot
Trick or trot.
on Thanksgiving morning, as per usual. Next year, I think we kind of like to look at, making that a little bit more organized with medals and T-shirts and some different things. So, there'll be more to come there, but don't forget about that. And then I just wanted to comment on 362nd. I love that extension. I see a lot of people using it, especially pedestrians, people walking their dogs. It's a beautiful road. My only question is, have we had some complaints with the intersection lining up with the other side? Because those are very confusing, even for somebody who's lived here a long time.
As far as what lanes go straight,
lanes
what
go
lanes
which
turn,
direction,
and why
yes.
there's
They're
three
in
lanes
both-
and
they're
four
in both
lights.
ways, right? It seems to be very confusing.
We've gotten a
So-
couple questions
Okay,
on the south side of 26. There is a sign that is now up that has some directions as far as which lanes go where. There is a need to repaint some of the arrows in that intersection. Of course, now it's very wet, so we need to wait for a couple of dry days to get that done.
Were you guys hurrying through those?
My understanding is that ODOT is responsible, I think, for 2 of those arrows that need to be painted, and one of them is ours. It's an overly complicated situation, apparently. But now it is too wet to do much of anything until we get some dry days. I believe arrows are painted on the north side of the road.
they are,
Yeah.
Right.
they are. It's just they don't translate, they don't transition well.
Yeah,
Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's super wide on one side and
Yep.
then really narrow on the other. It's not really clear where one transitions to the other. And then when you're coming from the south side to the north side, the straightaway and the turn now are the same lane.
yes.
Nice.
But there's 2 lights
But
and
there's
there's
2
only
lights
one
there.
lane. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
and so it's like, what lane are you supposed to be in? So, yeah, okay.
We've
as
gotten
long-
some
As
questions.
long as we're aware.
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect.
Well, and since we're on that, Jeff, we've already talked about the medians there during the school drop off for a bit.
Yeah, we have.
It's a beautiful road that is alleviating congestion.
I gotta be honest,
And-
I know exactly what you're talking about, cause I'm like, this, you can't even get through this road. So, yeah, I know. Anyway, it is a beautiful road. I'm glad to see people using it.
Absolutely.
That's all I got.
Chris. I didn't have any meetings during the last cycle, so I did get a chance to tour the bunker building, so thank you to Tyler and Rochelle for touring me through it. I had never been through it, so it was nice to see the space, and I mean, since I've been at council, we have to make decisions about that in the future.
That's
I'm going to
great.
go see it. Sorry I missed the tour with you, Carl. The date changed on the bunker, or not the bunker, on the watershed, and so I didn't get a chance to get on my calendar, so I couldn't make it. And then lastly, I want to just remind Tyler, I called you the other day, I still don't see it on the event calendar. We don't have anything promoting our city lighting ceremony on December 1st on the website. And I have people asking me about it, and I'm like, well, I think it's this day. He confirmed it for me, but we need to get it on the website.
And Kathleen pointed out earlier today, all of them are.
Yeah.
So the issue with that was that there was a delay producing the graphics that we wanted to do. So Tyler and I said, let's just get something up. It's gonna go up tomorrow. And then we'll just swap it out with the professional looking graphics after that.
I called back, because somebody asked me, and then I went and looked, and the last thing you could find online was from 2021.
Yeah.
But all the other communities were listed. I was like,
Yeah. You'll see it tomorrow. I know, yeah. Yep.
Thank you, though, for pointing out the lack of information on the calendar. Internally, I know when it is, but
Yeah.
thank you for pointing out when you don't see those things, so we can work with staff and get it updated.
No, just for, for all the, Kiwanis wanted to know what time is their event start on the second or whenever you committed to, so.
Quick report for me. I sat down on Saturday with Scott Kaiser, Samara Malala, and Nupa and Valerie from Ant Farm. Sean Drinkwine wasn't able to make it, but they're very, Ant Farm's growing quite a bit into those communities of Malala and Estacada. There's obviously a lot of money flowing and services in those areas right now. And so I've invited Nupa and Valerie to come and present to our council some of the different things that they're working on. They've also obviously been really active with our homelessness task force. And they've been meeting with their staff a lot. They've been meeting with Chief Landry a lot. But a lot of that's also communication through telephone. So I was like, I want you to show up and talk to our council, and but trying to keep those conversations going and communication flow really look good. But one of the things that came up, and it was in Tyler's report, that I think we should be proud of is we get a lot of community complaints and stuff about those RVs down on industrial and stuff. And not only did we get those RVs moved along, we got those folks placed into housing, right? Which is something to be really proud of. But it goes down to, if a tree falls in the forest, no one's around to hear it, did it actually fall? And it was a challenge that I gave to NUPA on Saturday that I'm also kind of giving to us is we've got to do a better job of telling the story of some of the things that we're doing. Homelessness and these transitional housing things, all these things are really scary. But there's also another story to tell as well, right? Of the hope and the relief and the renewal that it gives to many people. So
Jeff just shared this picture that we received this afternoon of Industrial Way. There is not a single vehicle parked on there.
yeah.
So just a huge shout out to the police department for continuing to follow up with those individuals, and Ant Farm for providing those services that they needed and getting them into housing. So I think that's a really big accomplishment from what we've done in the past. So
Let's get it on social media. Let's post that picture.
Let's
I
do
mean,
it.
and, talk
Yeah.
about the big success there. Trick or treat, a lot of kids talk about success, lots of young families and kids walking around with our Chamber of Commerce down our Main Street. Also, beautiful night on Halloween. Thank you to our law enforcement officers for being out there, being present, being visible. Everybody had a great time. I know our family did. And then it was mentioned, I already talked about this. But with the community campus subcommittee, we met, and we're well, some really cool pictures. We're at the point of some really cool pictures at this point that we're really excited to kind of share with everybody. That's tied to some different approximate budget figures. And like we mentioned, kind of all this homework and deep diving we're doing is going to lead to a pretty robust conversation and goal setting for our Urban Renewal Board. With that, I will go ahead and adjourn us so that we can get into a robust conversation. Well, I'm not adjourning. That's right, Jeff. We are still in the meeting, but we are transitioning from our council meeting into the work session. So with that, let's get to our clear and objective code audit work session. Tyler, do you want to kind of start us off here?
I'll just tee it up and then turn it over to Kelly.
Okay.
One of the council's goals was to do a deep dive into our clear and objective code audit. It's been a long time in the making. MIG, APG.
Whatever.
Which order of the letters has been a huge help in facilitating this project. And so I'll turn it over to Kelly to kind of give a little more of an update and where we're at in the project and then go from there.
Yeah, I was gonna, I think we're getting close to being on the home stretch. I want to thank both Kate and Kathy for really doing most of the work. I've done some and kind of given my input and given some feedback on different documents that they've sent to me, but it's really been, the majority of the work has been done by them. And I would also like to thank our city attorney, Josh Sober. He's been really instrumental in giving us feedback, especially on the really sticky, complicated issues through the clear and objective audit. So thank you, Josh. And Josh is on the line tonight, I believe, in case you have any questions of our city attorney, in addition to Kate, Kathy, and myself. The only other thing I was going to mention is that if you look at, before I turn it over to Kate and Kathy, is that if you look at the calendar, depending on how tonight goes, we anticipate bringing this to the Planning Commission most likely in January and back to the City Council, hopefully for an adoption hearing in February. So we're getting very close. So Kate and Kathy, take it away.
And
Actually,
those,
that
and just so
microphone
you
we
know,
have right
those
there.
don't amplify. They just go into our Zoom.
And do we need it with
Recording.
this one here or,
So that's an omnidirectional mic that's really going to pick up any one of these signals. So
Okay,
we're in
awesome.
good shape.
all right, good. And can we start our presentation? Is it,
Oh, do I need to do anything to get it up there?
Yeah, let me know.
oh, sorry.
I don't know if I crossed it. I turned off it a lot. Both directions.
Okay. Well, hello again. I'm Kathy Corliss and I'm a principal with MIG APG. And we are happy to be here again tonight. We were with you last in June. And at that time, walked through a really lengthy packet of code amendments. That packet has returned to you, but with some changes that were discussed at that meeting and suggestions from, as a result of that conversation, as well as some other changes. For tonight's work session, we thought we would recap the feedback that we received from the City Council and Planning Commission and just kind of highlight some of the updates that were made to the code as a result of that. Review some state legislation that happened to pass kind of in this intervening period. We can't, it keeps moving, right? Moving target. And so we thought we would discuss that and then what those further updates were per that legislation. And then maybe just quickly touch on next steps. So if that sounds all right, we'll proceed. All right, so as this was, Kelly already described the schedule, and so I don't need to dwell on this. But obviously we're getting to the end. And again, if the packet of amendments looks about right to you all, and you feel like it's ready, we would be ready to make any final edits that were identified that you'd like to see, and bring that packet back, hopefully for adoption. And again, Planning Commission and then City Council. So again, follow up from the June work session. We had, and I'm just going to touch on these very quickly. If you have any questions, please just interrupt me and we can dive into these in more detail. But you may remember some of this discussion from our last meeting, although that was a while ago. City cannot require conditional use for multifamily development in the C1 and C3 zoning districts. We knew that. We had a recommendation to remove the option for standalone multifamily in those districts. And the direction was, yes, do that. So you won't see any changes in this packet. Just kind of, again, just recapping some of the conversations, make sure that's still where we want to be. Simplifying the clear and objective design standards for mixed use buildings in C1 and C3. Again, the solution, the recommendation was to limit residential development above the ground floor to only above the ground floor. And there was support for that recommendation. Again, no changes were made. Requiring conditional use for 0 lot line dwellings. You can't do that. And that's simply the solution was again to remove that option in the SFR district. And again, there was, oh yes, please.
I noticed that we do have the ability to do the 0 lot line dwellings in other districts for single detached homes. And so I'm wondering, but that didn't get changed in the other zones.
Yeah, so the problem was that it was a conditional use. And so if you, and this is going to seem kind of counterintuitive, I think. But if you allow a housing type, you have to allow it by a clear and objective path. And so a conditional use is not a clear and objective decision. It requires discretionary approval criteria. And so the choice is either either you allow the housing type by a clear and objective path or you don't allow it. You can't have it only be available. That housing type can't only be available through a discretionary path. So it seems like, well, gosh, how is it hurting anything to allow it discretionary, as a discretionary path? It seems to be more helpful than not, right? But unfortunately, that's not an option. Yeah, and so we could have read the other way to go, if you'd like to consider it, would be to allow that use outright as it is in other zones in that zone. So that would be.
So we'll allow 0 lot lines like for single dwellings in medium and low density and high density.
Yeah, right now it's so the SFR's district, they were conditional.
Yeah, okay.
You could have taken it to say it had to be a bright yes or no. And the recommendation was no. Okay. But you could make a recommendation and say, no, we want that to be a bright yes, as opposed to a no, if that makes sense. It seems a little counterintuitive, but yeah, okay. Good question though. And then there is we have this need to define the rather vague or discretionary term oriented toward a transit street. And so we had made a recommendation that the building entrance face the street. And also we had recommended a distance of 25 feet as an example. We didn't hear any suggestions for a different distance. We think that distance makes a certain amount of sense. And so we thought we would go ahead and include that in the draft code. So that's what you do see. The code has been updated in the version that's in your current packet to have 25 feet as the maximum setback from a transit street. So oriented toward the transit street now means facing, the entrance must face and be within 25 feet of. So that's how we've defined it.
Clarification, so on Bluff Road and DeBarco, any new homes built along those have to face the street, because now they don't. All the,
So
how would that work, Kelly?
Where
Bluff and DeBarco, and how all the streets were supposed to face the transit thing, but then
the
now it's all the
streets,
backyards.
you mean the houses are supposed to face the transit streets?
Houses along DeBarco and Bluff. They were supposed to, but then we kind of didn't make them develop that way, so we have a bunch of backyards facing DeBarco.
Where on DeBarco are you referring to?
You're referring to across the trail between Bluff and 211?
I'm just, you know,
She's
anywhere
using that
there's
as an example.
backyards. you know,
Yeah,
just-
I can't think of any examples on DeBarco where the front yard doesn't face the street, actually. So that wouldn't be changed. It's that we're getting pushed back on what does oriented towards mean, which is silly because everybody knows that means facing the street. So we just changed the verbiage. And then the 25-foot thing is to make sure that there's a maximum setback so that, you know, if you're gonna have a house oriented towards the transit street, it wouldn't make sense to allow it to be like 100 feet off the transit street.
Sure.
That'd be kind of contradictory to the purpose.
But from now on in, it's exactly 25 feet.
No, it's just a maximum. And remember, this is just the clear and objective pass, so they
Oh,
can
I
all,
see.
they could come to us and say, hey, we want it to be 40, and they could always go through the variance procedure through a discretionary path.
I missed the maximum.
Okay, great question, though. So on item number 5, that was, you may recall this conversation about not being able to limit the occupancy of unrelated individuals in dwelling units and how that then creates kind of a blur in the distinction between what's congregate housing and a dwelling unit, because it had previously been based on the number of individuals in the unrelated individuals in the dwelling unit. That was what was the trigger. So since that went away, we had recommended we're using the number of bedrooms as a proxy. And so 8 bedrooms becomes if it's more than that, it's considered a congregate housing. And if it's less than that, it's a dwelling unit. It was noted, and I think correctly so, that there was a circular reference between dwelling unit and family. And we've made amendments to correct that. So that was a good catch. And the revised draft has corrections for that. We also felt that as we talked about it more as a project team, that the name congregate housing was confusing potentially, because we really aren't thinking of that as a residential use per se, but so the change was to congregate living. Because it's really much more of a, you know, it can be a variety of care facilities that, you know, aren't necessarily going to be categorized as residential living. So that change to the name is, yeah.
In my world, family is a trigger challenged word in real estate. You can't use it, like you can't use master bedrooms anymore. You really can't use mother-in-law, you can't use family, because it connotates certain relationship. So we're okay with using family here, and it couldn't be some other term. I don't know.
We could change it. We certainly have, you know, some jurisdictions are using just household or something like that.
I'm okay with that.
But it's.
I'm okay with
Get a
family too,
family.
but yes,
But legally, well, right.
It's defined very, very broadly to be very inclusive.
Yeah.
So,
as long as it's legal.
it's, yeah,
I like family too. so,
okay,
but
I understand.
I just know I'm.
Whose family are we talking about?
I can't use it.
But we did, I mean, the definition of family is very, very broad, of course.
Okay.
And our attorney is on the line. Josh, do you have any problems with the term family as long as we define it as you have seen?
No, and in fact, I think we discussed that as a project team too, that as long as we define that term broadly enough, it's fine. And it avoids the needing to change names of things like single family dwelling as well.
Step goes on down.
It does.
A lot of things. that go there.
Yeah, that was the issue. I mean, it is a changeable thing, of course, but it did create a cascading effect, shall we say. Yeah. Good question, though. And then finally on item number 6, then there was the type, I don't know, you may recall this one as well, the type 1 adjustment that you have today has these discretionary approval criteria for the conversations, the attorney, the team, that doesn't really work because notice is required for discretionary decisions. So the thought was, well, we'll just keep the type 2 adjustment that you have. It's broader, more comprehensive, same approval criteria, works great, has the right kind of notice. So that was the best solution. So again, there was support for that recommendation. No changes. Next slide. And then we had changes for Senate Bill 8. That was the one that has the allowance for affordable housing, has density and height bonuses. We added a new section. You saw that last time. There was support for those recommendations. You'll see in this version, if you were comparing them carefully, you would see minor clarifications to incorporate changes from HB 3395. And so and Kate's going to talk more about the changes to address the new legislation. But when we did that, when we reorganized to put that into the same section that we'd written previously for SB 8, it triggered like some organizational changes and things like that. So you will see changes to that section that affect the changes you'd seen previously for SB 8. But I think it'll all make sense when you see it in light of the new legislation. And then finally, there was that staff suggested tree removal permit exception for park maintenance. There was a suggestion to allow view maintenance, and that was added. So that's a very quick recap of the conversation we had last time, the changes that you'll see in this draft relative to those. If all of those still sound like those were the right recommendations, right direction, then we should be good to go with these amendments and responses to those. But do let us know if there's anything beyond that.
I will say the last one, I think the view maintenance was added by Councilor Walker. And then on the previous page, the circular definition, that was from Councilor Hoganson. So that was an excellent catch. He's not here tonight, I know, but and I don't remember the other ones, but I do remember those two.
So on your, I don't know if this is the same thing, but on that affordable housing, all that, I'm looking at page 9 of 18 on your presentation slides. Are you gonna get into that more?
We are,
Okay.
yeah.
I had a question.
Yeah, I just was gonna pause there,
It's
and if
just
there
in
were
summer.
any, so that's where we left off last time, coming out of your June work session and following up on that. And then again, there's new legislation that happened. We have to wrap this up so they can quit changing things on us.
Well, I'm sure they'll stop for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see you next year.
And so I'm gonna hand it to Kate to cover the next sections.
All right. Good evening, everyone. So there were several legislative changes as part of the 2023 session. And we had some conversations with the city attorney's office and staff to kind of determine which of those changes would necessitate changes to the development code, or would, the city would benefit from updating its code to reflect those changes. So we're going to talk about those. So the first one is House Bill 3395, which was kind of an omnibus housing bill. There are multiple sections to it. I think, well, at least 17, because I think we address section 17 in our amendments. But really, I think there are just 3 sections that we ended up including those in the development code updates. So section 2 has to do with residential use of commercial lands. And this is the additional kind of affordable housing allowances that only applies to lands that are zoned for commercial uses, and specifically excludes areas that allow industrial uses. So essentially only commercial zones this allowance would apply to. So there is some overlap with Senate Bill 8, which we had included in the previous draft, but this provision is a little more narrow. Again, just commercial zones. I'll talk about some of the other differences, but this one applies to 2 different types of development. For just purely residential development, it applies if each unit is affordable to a household earning 60% of the area median income or less. It also applies within mixed use structures that have residential and commercial uses. If the residential component is affordable to moderate income households, which are defined as earning between 80 and 120% of the area median income.
So we only have to approve it if it's gonna meet these parameters.
Correct.
Okay.
Unless the applicant chooses to go with the Senate Bill 8 path, and if they also are eligible under that path. So we kind of merged the two provisions together and just allowed, actually, we didn't really merge the two together, but we, in the code, you'll see that we, for projects that could potentially apply under both paths, give the applicant the option to choose which path because it was too complicated to reconcile how they overlap and don't overlap. And we talked to Josh about it, and that was kind of the solution we came up with. But for these provisions, yes, only on commercial lands and only if they meet these specific affordability criteria.
Questions real quick. So is the affordable housing requirements on anything besides commercial? Is it on any of the R1, R2, or
Just, no, just in, well,
If you're looking at SB 8 as well as this, then yes.
right.
So that's where it gets complicated. So there was the earlier legislation, SB 8, Senate Bill 8. Yeah,
I keep track of all.
I know, I'll believe, I right. So there was that, and that affects different zones. A different set of zones has a slightly different definition of what's affordable, what qualifies under that, and provides height and density bonuses in certain circumstances.
So on which zones?
Well, so we can talk about that. I think I'm gonna let Kate finish talking about the latest changes, and then let's loop back to that chapter and we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. Because I think it would help maybe if we opened up that and like showed you like how that's gonna work. We can go over those sections maybe a little bit because it's complicated, and I think it would help to put it on the screen, but I don't want to interrupt her presentation. Yeah.
So does this kind of supersede what we wrote on issue number 2 on the previous, where we said C1 and C3 could only have mixed use with residential? If somebody comes in, they can use this to build regardless of what the ground floor is like?
That's correct.
Yeah. For these type of affordable projects, right?
As long as it meets the AMI, right?
Yeah.
As long as it's affordable.
And Senate Bill 8 had done that even before this bill was passed as well. Yeah. So it's actually been in effect for a little over a year now, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2021.
Yeah, so as long as,
So-
I mean, essentially, as long as the AMI is met, they can do whatever they want on that C1, C3 as far as from a build prospect, whether it's residential or commercial on the floor, mixed unit and residential upstairs.
Yes, I mean, it's, although if it's a mixed use building, then the
Goes
AMI,
higher.
yeah, is high, right. So, right. But if they met the low one, yeah, it does give them a definitely more flexibility as far as the zones and the standards.
And that's just so when we go back to those documents in the EOA that we just had presented on October 16th, that's why they had actually put aside, I forget the exact acreage, but X amount of that commercial land that's available right now for housing. Because we firmly believe that there will be Senate Bill 8 or House Bill 3395 projects that will consume a percentage of the commercial lands. So I think it's only reasonable to assume that that will happen going into the future.
Just help me get my mind wrapped around these numbers. What is 60% or 80% or 120? What is those dollar amounts? You know?
It's a good question. So it'd be for Clackamas County, I believe. I don't know, I don't have those numbers.
I don't either. You will know those numbers on December 4th at the next joint work session when we talk about the housing needs analysis. Those, I believe those numbers will be presented as part of that analysis. And again, that analysis is assuming that a certain amount of residential land will also go in, or a certain amount of residential units will also go into our commercial land. So it's getting very difficult to make assumptions on land availability going into the future with all these new bills.
Yeah.
So when you say approve certain affordable housing projects, that to me is very vague. Certain doesn't give me any kind of a certainty about what kinds of projects we're talking about here. So for example, I come to the city with a project to do affordable housing. What project definitions are you gonna apply to my affordable housing project? What do you?
Oh, I
So
was just gonna
there's
say,
broad
yeah,
statement
let's,
there.
why don't we, so.
Are you
we
gonna go
kinda-
that next? If you are,
Yeah, I
I'll
was
hold
gonna
it.
say,
Yeah.
let's open up that section
Go ahead,
and talk
go
about it
ahead.
in a little bit more detail, because since there's so many, those are all really good questions. We've kept them, obviously kept the slides really high level, because it's gonna get in the weeds fast.
I'll
So,
hold
yeah,
it.
okay.
This
Yeah, the
council would
legis-
never do that. We love,
Right?
we love the weeds.
The legislation does not use the term certain affordable housing. That's
sure it
just if it
doesn't.
meets all the criteria that are laid out in the bill.
Did you say that the AMI, the area would be Clackamas County? It's not more
It's I believe it's the
localized. These are some older numbers, but I think in fiscal year 2021, average income was like 71,500 from what I'm looking at. So don't quote me on this, but to give you a ballpark, Counselor Sheldon, 60% of that number. And again, that data is 2 years old, so painting a picture for you. It's not exact, but giving you a rough idea.
Okay, I'm gonna keep going, and then we can talk more after I get through this. So the legislation specifies that the housing has to be subject to the standards in the residential zone that's most comparable in density to the allowed commercial uses in the subject zone. So basically saying you can't apply whatever standards would normally apply in that commercial zone. You have to apply the sort of siting and design standards that apply in a residential zone that's comparable in density. So as part of what we propose, as you'll see on the next slide, we made some decisions about what those comparable zones are. And I actually don't have them spelled out here, but I think for C1 and C3, I believe we specified the R2 zoning district. And for C2, we specified the R3 zoning district. So basically, sort of the highest density zone, those standards would apply in the general commercial zone, and that sort of moderate density residential standards would apply in the kind of more village and downtown zones.
And we did talk to our attorney about that. So I don't know if Josh wants to add to that, but we also talked about, could we use the lower density provisions? We felt that would probably be challenged. I don't know if you want to talk to that, Josh, at all.
Yeah, I mean, comparable is obviously kind of a vague term. So we just tried to choose the one that felt most comparable as the least likely to be challenged.
Most comparable.
It's not,
Need to be clear and objective.
it's not clear and objective. Most legislation isn't, so.
We figured it'd be better to make these decisions now so that staff isn't trying to figure that out kind of down the line if they have an application. Jumping back to the previous slide, I did want to point out a couple of the differences between Senate Bill 8, which is the one that has the height and density bonuses. I already talked about the fact that House Bill 3395 has more limited applicability in terms of zoning. Different affordability requirements. So there's that sort of 60% AMI versus the sort of more moderate eligibility for mixed use development. And Senate Bill 8 has height and density bonuses, whereas HB 3395 does not have those bonuses. Another thing that I didn't include in the slides is that this bill does not apply to lands that were brought into the UGB within the last 15 years. And it also doesn't apply to vacant land. So it seems to be geared towards allowing sort of reuse of existing commercial lands for housing, for affordable housing. So not kind of areas where the city is growing on its edges necessarily.
So just, so I am understanding, so, the C1 is the, C3 is the village, C2 is general commercial, and C1 is downtown. So I'm concerned because we have put like village commercial out at Bluff and Kelso, nowhere. What I think I heard you say is that we're gonna allow the highest density stuff on C3 to be like high.
C3, I think we connected that with the standards that apply to the R2 zone, so the moderate density zone. So those standards would apply in the C3 zone.
And then what's the downtown
Downtown would also be the R2
and then
standards.
general commercial is,
That would be R3. And I think these are interpretations that I think a court would also probably might make, or they might actually interpret it to be require the city to allow even higher intensity development. So I think we're kind of erring on the side of being a little bit more conservative here. I think if you tried to make it even, tried to apply even lower intensity standards, I think that could get challenged potentially.
Not be defensible.
Right.
You know, this is so complex. I'm just sitting here thinking to myself, if I'm a developer, I'm bringing my lawyer with me. And unless you want to explain it all to me as a developer, I assume the city will not take on any explanation, no defense. We'll let the developer come to them with all these proposals, and then there'll be a combination of lawyers getting together and talking.
I mean,
about
I'm not gonna be
what
pushing these. Is that what you're asking?
applies. Kelly, this just looks like it's really complex.
Oh, it's a nightmare. Yeah, the legislature didn't really anticipate that a lot of small cities are gonna know how to implement these things.
It's a different story.
We
than we're
don't- we
talking about
don't-
Tonight, but boy,
We don't have a whole sustainability and affordable housing program like the city of Portland does or something like that. So,
right.
yeah, it's me trying to implement it and talking to our attorney. That's what it's gonna be.
I was gonna ask you what the bonuses are all about.
I've had
Bonuses?
2 inquiries about Senate Bill 8 already, though, from
Okay.
developers in Colorado. So people are aware of the bill. Now, 3395, I've not heard anybody, nobody's asked me about it yet.
Will we be, well, I'll catch that later. Go ahead.
Right now, the answer is we're in a moratorium.
Oh, what an easy hour.
All right, so the proposed code updates are to incorporate these provisions into the same new proposed chapter as the Senate Bill 8 provisions. And again, to allow applicants to choose either of those 2 paths, depending on which they prefer and which, they're eligible for. To specify which zones are eligible, since the legislation leaves that a little bit open to interpretation in terms of, commercial zones that allow, or zones that allow commercial uses but not industrial, just making that really clear that that is the C1, C2, and C3 zones.
are you saying that we have a choice on specifying which zones are eligible?
Well, I wouldn't say you have a choice. And actually, in this case, it's more straightforward, I think, than in Senate Bill 8, which is the other affordable housing bill, which is a lot more confusing in terms of its applicability for zoning. This is actually pretty straightforward. So it's just really just spelling it out so that it's very clear to staff and applicants, these are the zones where it applies. And it's zones that allow commercial uses and do not allow industrial uses.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm gonna say about that though is that, these village commercials are out there in the boonies. Okay, they're not near, they might be on a little bit of a transit thing, but they're not anywhere near downtown and all the other stuff. So when we're talking about putting affordable housing, units out there on Bluff and Kelso, it just doesn't make sense. And so if we have options to specify that village commercial doesn't apply and just keep it to downtown and general commercial, that seems like a better fit for the intent for providing affordable housing where people may not have cars or anything else.
I totally agree with you. That's 100% correct. I think, and the transit master plan even pointed this out, that you shouldn't have village commercial out there at Kelso and Bluff. So I don't think the legislation would allow us to do that, but I think the better solution would be to ask, I know those property owners out there don't even want it to be village commercial. I know all 3 of them don't.
Right.
So I think the better thing to do would be a zone change.
Yep.
And then it eliminates it. So, but I agree 100% on that. It's not a good spot at all.
Are you saying we can't cut out the C3 from the?
I was gonna say it won't do anything to solve the SB 8 problem though, or
Correct,
same
that's
question,
correct.
right? So it would address this concern, but affordable housing through SB 8 would still be an option. So it's
Oh.
the, because
We were gonna make it industrial.
oh, well.
But it would remove one of the paths.
It would remove one of the paths. And so, yeah, and again, we can take a deeper dive into the, exactly how that chapter would work and the 2 paths. So you could get a better sense maybe of whether that makes sense. I mean, maybe other reasons to want to do that, of course.
There is, yeah.
And so certainly a consideration, but I guess just as far as like solving the concern about higher density housing out there. I don't know that it necessarily, so just caution there, but keep looking, sorry.
But this looks to me like one more reason why we should get rid of the village zone. I just seems like there are so many issues around that with our comp plan.
And you had like 0 successes.
Well, one success, but it was a daycare. That's the only thing we've been able to do. Just doesn't seem reasonable, but
I would agree. I think that's probably a conversation for
that's another
another night.
conversation.
Yeah,
Again, there's so many things bubbling up here that
yeah.
I'm having a hard time.
I would agree with you,
figuring
but
out.
I think that'll be a different conversation.
Yeah, okay, move on.
Okay.
Get done tonight.
Another thing that we specified in the draft code is what type of review procedure would apply, because the legislation doesn't provide that. So specifying that at a minimum, the type 2 design review would be required. It potentially could be elevated to a type 3 if there were variances requested, et cetera. But at a minimum, type 2 design review. And then, as Kathy mentioned, we clarified some of the provisions that were already in the draft for Senate Bill 8, kind of looking at how these two sections lined up and adding some clarifications where we could, related to eligible zones, and then again specifying the type 2 design review procedure. Okay, I'm going to move on to another section of HB 395. Hopefully this one will be relatively straightforward. So this is section 15, which is related to subdividing for development of affordable housing. So for subdivisions that are proposed to be developed with affordable housing, the only thing this changes it requires local governments to accept award letters from public funding sources. So most affordable housing, not all affordable housing developments are at least partially subsidized or funded through public funding sources from the state or from the federal government. And that comes in the form of a letter saying how much money is being granted. So cities required to accept that as financial assurance to guarantee some of the public improvements associated with the subdivision. So this is something that the city already does for, standard subdivisions. It allows financial guarantees for the final plat to be approved instead of requiring those improvements to be installed before the final plat is approved. So there's kind of 2 different paths. You can get a bond essentially to say that, you have the money to pay for it down the line, or you make the improvements. So this is just allowing that public funding award letter to serve as that guarantee for affordable housing developments. And you can think of a Habitat for Humanity project as an example of that type of development. It's not as common, I would say, as sort of more multifamily affordable housing development. But so the proposed change is just to add that as kind of a new paragraph within section, within the land division section.
The possibility for cost to go greatly up, as we've been finding out on every project we do. If we accept something like one of these things with one of these promise letters, award letter, and then, then they get a plat and, 5 years later or 10 years, whatever, they've got the plat, they have to develop it within a certain amount of time, I assume, but costs go up. And what's our ability to deal with that? Is that our problem or their problem or what?
Yeah, typically when you do the plat recording and they have a substantial amount of improvements that still need to occur. So I'm talking about like over $200,000 or $300,000. Typically we do like a subdivision agreement and have deadlines and stuff in there. I do agree with you though, that with how drastic costs are like all over the place now, I think the thing we would probably want to look at in the future is looking at how much we collect through the bond or through an insurance letter like this. Right now it's 110% of the estimate. I think it would probably be prudent to up that to 120 or 130 going into the future. That's something we could potentially do with the clear and objective audit. It would just be changing the number.
Yeah.
So if anybody feels strongly about that, we could definitely do that. We've talked internally as staff that the 110 we're not that comfortable with anymore because of what you just pointed out, Counselor.
Smart.
I've certainly seen 120 in other codes. Have not done an overall assessment of that, across multiple codes, but I know 120 is fairly common.
Yeah, so we could, if you want to see that when it comes before the hearing, we could definitely put that in there. The one, most developers I've seen don't get bonds above about $1 million, just because I think it costs so much to get the bond.
Right.
But it's not saying that it couldn't happen. And so I don't know. I think it's a good point.
Would you like us to look into it and just confirm that
Yeah.
other jurisdictions are using 120? Okay, I'll double check
Or
that.
what
That's-
the legally
Yeah,
defensible
permissible. Yeah.
maximum would be.
Okay,
From a finance perspective, I wouldn't be opposed to going to 150 if that was justifiable and legal.
oh,
I mean,
yeah,
just throwing a number out.
Yeah.
To that point, we've had on a much smaller scale issues with, a $10,000 bond from 5 years ago, and now that's not enough to cover the sidewalk extension that needed to happen or whatever.
Yep.
So on a larger scale project, I just can imagine
Yeah.
the nightmare that we would find ourselves in.
I wonder, and I
Um,
haven't seen this done, like, not to make the code overly complicated, but you could see where if they were gonna perform, if they had a performance time frame that was relatively short,
Yep.
you could do 120. If
Oh.
it was longer, they wanted longer time, you'd have to ask for more,
Yeah.
just to protect yourselves against that eventuality. I have not seen that, but it does make a certain amount of sense. Let me.
Yeah,
look
short
into it.
term and a long term.
Yeah,
sort of
something like
timeline.
that.
Would there ever be a situation where if we up that percentage, the developer would just say, oh, we're gonna go look somewhere else?
No, because, and the reason why is because they always have the option of just doing all the improvements. This is just giving them an extra option to bond it instead of doing the improvements right then and there.
Okay.
And actually, if they did say that, I would be very like, okay, maybe we don't want that bond then. Because that would raise a big red flag to me that they
Yeah.
don't feel like they're gonna be able to successfully
Right,
manage the
right.
project. So I think that'd actually be pretty telling. It could be a good sign for us. Like, okay, good.
See you later.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I don't quite understand what this public funding award letter is. I mean, I get it's like a grant for affordable housing, but is it spelled out that, well, we need, 400,000 for the sewer and the water and all that? And then, 600,000 for the housing itself? Is it all
Yeah.
broken out? So I just want to make sure that we get our infrastructure stuff.
It would be reviewed by our attorney's office
Right,
before I accept
All
it.
right, not worried.
Because I'm not very familiar with them either, so
Right.
Have you ever seen one?
I have not, but I don't know.
Yeah,
if
I
Peter
was
has.
trying to find an example and I
Thank you.
couldn't find any.
Yeah, this is
I don't know
not
if
very
Josh, our attorney, knows.
Okay.
common. That's his energy on it.
I'm not seeing a decision for us though. It says we have to do this.
This is the proposal. If you disagree, let us know, but otherwise, I mean, it's.
But disagreeing doesn't do anything.
It's a state requirement.
But right, all right. Let's go ahead.
Shut up and.
I mean,
let's
we're-
go ahead. I
Well, we
mean,
can't.
I just have a question for you.
Inflation factor.
Maybe this is more for personal education, but when you talk about a bond that a contractor has, if they're doing something in the future for us, can we put out a performance bond? Make them take out a performance bond for the city, like you do for public projects? To make them, expedite their timelines or make sure that they complete their projects?
We can
Does the city
do,
that?
we make them do a financial guarantee that everything's upheld for 2 years. So once I sign the plat, they have to have that in place so that if, say, a road section failed or sewer pipe burst, they're on the hook. But no, we don't have anything in addition to that.
The performance bond that for a
Mhm.
contractor, that they'll build that thing within X amount of time, and if they don't, then the bond,
So there,
pays for that service to be completed by somebody else.
I mean, that is what the bond would do.
Yeah.
The financial guarantee that we're talking about here, that is what it would do.
Same,
But as Counselor Walker pointed out, we just want to make sure whatever amounting we're getting through that bonding mechanism is, say it happens 2 years later, is actually enough to cover us hiring a contractor and doing it. Yeah, and the one good thing is with bonding, because I deal with it all the time, monthly, and the one good thing is 99% of developers, they're never gonna want us to call on the bond, because then their bond rating goes down bad,
Right.
and then they can't get any money for any of the projects, so they have a big incentive to fulfill the bond obligation,
I think we've only come close once.
once
since
that I
I've
can
been here,
remember, and
yeah.
we've never fully called on the bond yet.
Right.
But we have come close once, yeah. That is true.
Thought we did one there where the clinic is. Didn't that bond we collect on that and build
No.
the sidewalk?
No,
Look,
All right. The next section, 17, is around single room occupancies or SROs. So the bill requires local governments to allow single room occupancies in all residential zoning districts. So these are single room units that share kitchen or bathroom facilities. So they may have one or both shared facilities. And you know, these could, a sort of a small scale SRO could look very similar to just a house with individually rented bedrooms. And actually, there's nothing to stop the city right now from having, or a house from renting out individual bedrooms, but just not calling it an SRO. But you know, the city
Would private in-home adult care fall into this category where you have somebody who owns a home and they have residents that are under their care in different bedrooms?
Yeah, so those are typically classified as a residential home or a residential facility, depending on the size of the facility. And so those have a separate classification.
Okay.
And
Is
you
that
know,
congregate living?
Yeah, I feel like you took us through this conversation in June, right? But we had options back then.
yeah, so there's a couple of different things going on. So like if you're thinking of like a residential home, there was some prior, and again, this has been in the ORS for a long time, rules around the size of a residential home, and residential homes of it, which is kind of what you're picturing, I think, that meet a certain threshold of number of bedrooms and number of residents or
Right.
you know, patients. Have to be allowed where you allow single family residences. That's been on the books for a long time. And residential facilities, which are a little bit larger, have to be allowed where you allow multifamily. Also that same thing's been on the books for a long time. So those have been in play. The SRO doesn't necessarily have any kind of like healthcare, like it's not providing it's just a dwell, or it's just space for rent, right?
Okay.
So it's not a medical facility.
Okay.
The question about congregate living.
Because we limited that to 8 bedrooms.
Right. And
I remember
this came up after that conversation. I don't think it necessarily changes that conversation unless you wanted to like somehow have these like sync up, in which case we'd have to change the definition of dwelling unit to 6 or fewer, but then that gets, there's a lot of people that might want to have a house, a typical house that has 8 bedrooms. So it, you know, if otherwise, I think it's just that if it's up to 6 bedrooms rented individually, that has to be allowed, kind of similar to a residential.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah.
So we're limited to 6 bedrooms on SROs?
So I'll get to that on the next slide. Just to point out that it could look similar to a house with rented bedrooms, or it could be sort of a larger scale SRO with, which would be more like kind of a dormitory style, where there's kitchen on one floor and there's a number of rooms, and they might have shared bedroom or shared bathroom facilities as well. So the bill has a specific definition that makes that clear how it is intended to work. So to get it, what cities are required to allow in single family zones, you must allow up to 6 single room units per lot. So within a single home or a single building, you would have to allow up to 6 units on a lot. And then in multifamily zones, you have to allow the number of units that would be consistent with the maximum density requirements in terms of units per acre. So how this would play out in Sandy zones, in addition to adding the definition to the definitions chapter. So for the single family zones, SFR and R1, you would allow up to 6 SRO units per lot. Then in the R2 district, you would allow up to 14 SRO units per acre. And then R3 allowing up to 20 SRO units per acre.
Can you just clarify though, what's the difference between this SRO business and the congregate living code language we have?
So
is it the same thing?
No, congregate living is broader. It's going to involve, and we can turn to in fact, let me get to the and I'll take us to the definition of congregate living as it is in the code. We could talk about that as well. We can like put that on the screen and so you can have a chance to look at that and we can talk about the difference. But that typically involves care of the residents. And so it has employees that are, providing a certain level of care and, shared facility, shared meals, that kind of thing. So that congregate living is not just, I think SROs are intended to be comparable to a dwelling unit, even though they don't meet the definition of a dwelling unit, which has a, kind of all of the, things self-contained in a single unit, right? So its own kitchen, its own bathroom. SROs don't have that, but they're kind of getting considered as if they were a dwelling unit in a sense, if that makes sense. I realize does seem like it's all overlapping. And again, we're just trying to respond to this legislation as it's coming out.
Yeah, that biggest differentiator was the people being, if you had people, employees.
Yeah.
That work for
people in
the care.
Yeah.
So an
right,
example for a congregate would be something like that, Avamere, where you have medical facilities, employees, and
Yeah, I'm
I
not
suppose
familiar
it
with
wouldn't work
that.
very well because there's gonna be some bathrooms specific to the rooms and stuff, but sort of that direction, and then this SRO is more of like a dormitory.
No,
I would say Avamere's your more traditional assisted living.
yeah. So Carl, there's across from Cedar Ridge.
Oh, down there, okay,
On Mid Street, there's a place called the Cranberry House.
right, I know what it is.
So that would be congregate living. She takes care of, she's got rooms there. She takes care of people.
Medical things.
Yeah,
Right.
if I'm understanding SRO would simply be, I own a home and I rent out every bedroom.
And so,
Yeah.
I thought somewhere around, we were talking parking units.
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a second.
Yeah.
And that's one of the main reasons we're bringing it into the code. Otherwise, the legislature doesn't speak to the parking requirements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Start charging the kids.
You should.
You have SROs there.
So, and another thing that the legislation doesn't specify is what standards, citing and design standards would apply. So we're specifying that design standards for SROs up to 6 units would be subject to the single family design standards, since you have to allow up to 6 units in single family zones. And then SROs with more than 6 units would be subject to the multifamily design standards. So we just figured those standards would be most applicable to that kind of form of housing. And I will say this is not a very common form of housing. I think we haven't seen a whole lot of it developed in recent years. But it also could be the kind of thing that is out there and the city just doesn't really know
This is
about it.
college town stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it could be, yeah.
Honestly, with the price of living, you're probably gonna see this.
Yeah, you may.
Well, the thing that kind of gets me, okay, so on your thing, you got R2 and it's allowing 14 SOR units per acre. But then on the SFR and R1, it's 6 SSR units per lot. So you might have a 5,000 square foot lot and you've got 6 apartments on one 5,000 square foot lot.
Yes.
Well, I mean, they're not full-blown apartments.
They're
They're,
not
Well, no,
yeah,
but they're
yeah,
like
they're
dorm
just,
rooms.
they're just,
They're built,
yeah. But you could have a single family house and they may even be out there today. That's the thing, the city doesn't
Just don't know,
regulate if
yeah.
somebody decides in their home to put locks on the doors and rent those individually.
Yeah, I report.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't, it wouldn't necessarily be something that would come to you. So this is one of those things that could actually
Crawl spaces.
be present and you wouldn't necessarily know. And I think that's the thing that's,
I think when we're talking about a 5,000 square foot lot, allowing 6 bedrooms, I mean, you don't get 6 bedrooms on a 5,000 square foot lot.
Yeah, but nobody says they have to be a bedroom. They just have to be styled as a bedroom, right? A door and a window. They don't have to be classified as bedrooms in a home, right? They
I'm
just
sure
have to
there's
have a
fire
door and
code
window.
stuff.
Yeah, there would be, building code, fire code that would apply.
Yeah, there's some doability.
We're really like, we're guarding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess
We're
we
still in
can't,
the
we
weeds.
can't question it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another thing where that's required, we have to allow 6, okay, never mind.
Well, we don't have to put it into our code, but then we have limitations around design and parking
Yeah, right,
standards.
just.
Yeah.
So I'd say we definitely want to
Yeah.
incorporate it into the code.
Yeah.
I'll never get that.
Oh, here we go, right here.
6-car parking lot.
So here's your policy question where you can make some choices. So the bill doesn't specify what parking standards apply. So we are recommending 1 space per SRO unit, with the assumption that there's only 1 person living in each unit, most likely. So the alternatives that you could consider would be a lower ratio, which would be more consistent with the congregate living style that we've been talking about. And currently that form of occupancy requires 1 space for each 3 occupants plus another space for every 2 employees. You could also consider a higher ratio, which would be more consistent with the current multifamily parking standards, which are 1.5 parking spaces for each studio or 1-bedroom unit.
This is off-street parking.
Off-street parking.
So if you did, right now with our single family home requirement, you only had to have 2 parking spaces for an SF, for, you know, a home. With this, if you did have the 6 bedrooms, you'd have 6. So with what we're proposing at least.
I just wanted to mention, I'll say just my own personal opinion is that I'm leaning more towards 1.5 only because I'm thinking more abstractly. I remember when I was 20 years old, I didn't make much money. Me and my girlfriend moved into a room. We both had cars. We had 2 cars. I'm not thinking everybody only has 1 car. And then I'm thinking if these are the things that are going to happen, where is that extra car going to go? And I know it's going to go to the street. And if it's on the street, what do we have already on the street? Too many cars, in my opinion.
Right.
And so I'd rather increase that number just a little bit more to the 1.5, which is where I'm going with that, just to get my logic and share. But if everybody wants to do 1, I understand it, but I think the higher number, I think it helps keep it off the road, in my opinion. That's true.
Wouldn't that also act as a deterrent though? Like if I had a house and I'm gonna rent out 4 bedrooms, but I have to supply a parking space for each room, wouldn't that almost deter me from maybe doing that?
But is it, are we legally allowed to do that?
They have to have a parking space.
You can let Josh maybe.
The one thing before Josh speaks, and yeah, I would like to hear from Josh on this, but the one thing I would be a little cautious of, if you make the standard 2, because so my other hat is code enforcement. And if you make the standard too rigorous, we just won't have people reporting it.
Sure.
And I'm sure the police department could speak to that as well, but if, I think we just need to be cognizant of that. If we make it too onerous, I don't think anybody will report their SRO to us.
And this is just for building, right? Like, so if I had a 6-bedroom house and I wanted to go ahead and rent all my rooms out and turn it into an SRO, would I have to have this, or is this just to develop that building?
I think technically you'd come through us and develop it into that, but I think what you're getting at is what they already exist all throughout Sandy.
I don't think anyone even thinks.
They
to
call it
come tell us.
Airbnb.
Yeah.
Well, I won't say where these are located, but I know of 2 living situations in Sandy right now where we have code enforcement action going on, where there's anywhere between 8 and 10 people living at these houses, and everybody does have their own room and everything. So it is already happening out there.
But what is this? So you're saying, like, in order to, an SRO, is that like something I have to go get a permit for and all of that? Or is this just the development piece for that type of housing? I'm really trying to, can you just turn a 6, like what would stop, do we have a code that stops somebody from doing that? I can't think of anything.
Not really, I don't think.
And they have to report it to us in order for us to even know they were doing it.
But I mean, if I came and said that, like what would, and you're like, yeah, you can't do that. Like, what would you do to stop me?
I mean, our only avenue.
I have too many people in my house.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the only avenue would be to go through code enforcement on it.
I mean, they should have a business license, right?
That's correct.
As a rental,
They should.
residential rental.
But there's dozens, if not, there's probably over 100 houses in Oregon that are, or in Sandy that are being operated as a business that don't have business licenses.
But
Sure,
you
but I
have
think at this level though, I mean,
Yeah, right, not at 6.
I mean, we can let Josh speak to it too, our attorney.
But
Josh,
also
do you
just
have?
clarifying, this could be Airbnb stuff where people are renting out bedrooms, right?
Well, this isn't short term.
Yeah, that's actually different.
Permanent situation.
This is long-term,
It's a type of house.
maybe even a
Yeah.
lease of some kind, but probably
It
not.
typically would be, I
Or
think.
not.
But I'm aware of a couple of those. I don't know about the 8 one, but I do know 2 or 3 that are renting out 1 or 2 bedrooms. There's no
Anyway,
lease in there, it's just a handshake.
Getting back, I'm in favor of Chris's thought of the 1.5.
Me too. Me too.
But I hear the lawyer,
So I heard a few different questions there. There's nothing in the legislation that explicitly prohibits discouraging development through parking standards, like there is for middle housing. But I would be hesitant to do that. I would suggest that you should base your parking standards on what you think the parking needs are with that type of development instead. The bill does define these types of housing as a form of needed housing, and so there could be potentially an avenue for somebody to challenge it through that route if you're explicitly trying to discourage that type of development through parking standards. But I think Kelly's point is the more direct or immediate concern with doing that, which is just that you realistically probably end up penalizing those who are trying to do the right thing and comply with city code requirements. And you're not going to end up affecting anybody who's doing this kind of on the sly.
Well, this seems reasonable to have 1.5, because what did you say our single family is 2, right? So this is even a reduction, I mean, to a degree from that. You're adding more people, adult people typically, because you don't rent kids out rooms typically. And except Mr. Stan. And then, but with that being said, so these are adult people with cars and stuff. So we actually have a lower reduction on the same type of housing.
Well, you're requiring 9 parking spaces.
Yeah.
that would be a limit to me. If I had even 4 people, well, you're 6, you said 8, that's
Do we feel, so
Amazing.
legally is it defensible?
The 1.5?
Well, I do think it is a concern because, I mean, again, as the city attorney pointed out, I mean, not only do you have to have clear and objective standards, but you can't have your standards, be a barrier to clear and objective housing, right? That's now, I mean, yeah, I think, we should take a very close look at that. I mean, somebody could challenge it on that point. I think.
The unreasonable cost or delay. Yeah, that's another component of the clear and objective statute that says you can't discourage housing through your standards by creating unreasonable cost or delay to development.
I mean, we'll put whatever you want in there, but I do believe we'll be the first city in the state of Oregon probably to have these provisions in our code. So, and the state of Oregon will be aware of that. But if you want 1.5, we can definitely put that in the code.
Can you clarify single room occupancy means 1 person in 1 room?
Well,
Not
one
necessarily.
person's living in there, right?
Well, I mean, that,
it could be a husband and wife.
Well, that's just it,
Couple or
right?
something like that,
That's
or
just it.
mother, daughter.
well, let me just clarify
But
my point. If
Kid.
it actually is 1 person in 1 room, I could support the 1 per car per, house. If it's not, if single room occupancy does not mean just 1 person, then I'm more agreeing with the rest of those.
Right,
guys.
but, well,
Yeah, I struggle with 1.5. I think that's pretty restrictive. I'm more towards the 1. So I could see if it's a mother-daughter kind of thing, you don't want to have but 1 car. If it's a husband-wife or couple, I suppose there'd be a 2, but that would offset by the people next door that only have 1. I think 1.5.
Well, I think we're
is
getting
too
in
much.
there.
I'm a straight
We're
we're
overthinking it,
overthinking it. I'm a straight pragmatist in this. The state is very pro-housing. The judiciary is very pro-housing.
Yeah.
We'd be the only city out of all the cities in the state to do this. It would stand out like a sore thumb. Someone would eventually challenge us on it. I think we go with the
To
1.
your point.
Yep, 1.
Well, I just actually talked to the state and they said, I didn't realize this, but they said, oh, congratulations. I think you'll be the first one in the state to adopt provisions around this. And I thought, that's not something that's probably great. This will be the first one, and then everybody's gonna be looking to it and potentially challenging it. That's my only fear.
Quite frankly, my estimation of how much often this is gonna happen is it's very low. I wouldn't want to stick out like a sore thumb either. I'm more for the one. Let the chips fall where they may. I just don't see this happening very often. Even if it does, you probably won't hear about it very often.
I think that's the important, that's the important there.
Yeah. Is this similar though to, like, you need to have 2 off-street parking, but then you have a single car garage that never gets used, so you really don't actually have 2 off-street parking, it's 1 off-street parking?
Again.
Could be.
Yeah.
So really, we're gonna
I hate-
require 6, but 3 of them are a 3-car garage, and so there's really only 3,
But it just,
not to
Possibly.
Right.
it anymore, just
I think
asking the question.
Well, it's a bag of,
but I think it is a I think the goal would be to not discriminate against this housing type any more than you would a similar single family
Sure.
housing type. So if the similar single family housing type, same type of building, same parking, and they are filling their garage with storage and not using it, so they don't have the parking that they were required to provide. It's the same situation, sure. I mean, it could be the same, but I think the intent here is that this housing form, again, by getting rid of the limit on unrelated people in the household, I feel like it really changed this already, right? So whether they define it as, defining it as an SRO, creating that as a specific housing type to be allowed, seems to almost be redundant to having already required cities to get rid of the number of unrelated people. It does create this opportunity to then have the conversation though about, well, what is that? How would we define it? And what regulations would apply to it that are distinct? So that's, I guess, maybe the silver lining is
Yeah,
we can have this conversation.
The last thing I'll add is I think to Josh's point that he pointed out, we're penalizing the people that are being like honest and coming to us.
Yeah.
I think Councilor Exner is correct. There'll be a lot of these that we don't know about. But I do think the people that come to us and actually go through the permitting process, they will be the most likely of anyone to actually put the 6 parking spots there and keep them available for parking.
Yeah.
Whereas the people that never come to us and never actually go through the procedure, they would be typically the same people that would never meet the parking standard anyways and fill their garage and everything else.
So here, in my mind, I'm the neighbor next door and you got, what, 8 cars parked next door to me from now, where you only have maybe 1 or 2. I'd be kind of on the pissed off side of the world because I could never find a parking spot for my neighbors, visitors, etc. So to me, to require that many, 1.5, I think would be a couple of different problems. Just possibility of doing it in most places. And then I think it'd be very restrictive. I guess I'm more of an advocate for going to 1 and let the honest people kind of fit into that.
Well, for me, I think, if we could get a consensus on 1, and then our rationale, if we do get challenged being the first ones out there, that's, half a space less than we're requiring in apartments where we have the same kind of situation of couples living in a 1-bedroom or studio, and we require 1.5, and in this situation, we're only requiring 1. So I feel like it's fairly defensible from that standpoint.
Like I said, we can certainly do 1.5. We can do 1. It's really up to you. We're just trying to give you all the information to be able to give us a decision on it, on how you'd like
I
to.
think you're on board with 1, Carl, only because you brought up something that I didn't consider. That's not 2 adults going into the room. It could be a divorced
Could be a
parent
kid,
and their
too.
child,
It
and
could
then
be,
you only have 1 car instead of 1.5.
or teenager will have a car.
I know of at least 1, there's a teenager in there, he's going to the bus.
I don't see it. I don't see an adult and a child that's an 17-year-old and an adult living in a single room myself.
Right.
But I'm thinking like a mom or a dad and their boy or their girl is 5 or 6 and they're sharing a
Squeeze it in.
bedroom because they're having hard times. That's 1 bedroom. That's 1 car. I can go. All right.
Sorry to open that bag.
Wow.
I think we opened it.
Well, the legislature.
Well, yeah. We just handed it to you. Yeah. Okay, great. So there's one last very straightforward. This is another bill, House Bill 2984, which did a couple other things, but what we've incorporated into the draft code is just updated definitions of affordable housing and area median income. So those are just kind of clarifying what those definitions are, not really changing the substance of the definitions. And those are added into the affordable housing chapter. Okay, so before we get into next
Yeah,
steps, we want to revisit.
Right, so it sounded like there were two areas that we wanted to revisit. One was to take a closer look at the definition of congregate living. If that's of interest, we can just open that up on the screen and talk about that. And then,
You didn't enjoy that conversation enough.
well, I did, and
I'm okay with it. I'm okay with skipping that.
you're okay with skipping that?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to take a closer look at the affordable housing chapter and the way that it separates SB 8 and the 3395 sections and the zones and how that works? It is complicated. I mean, and we can open that up and kind of talk you through it if that would be
But
helpful.
essentially though, it's two paths.
It's two paths, right? And there's different zones and there's different criteria and there's different affordability criteria. If you pick at the SB 8 path, which is SB 8 has now been codified into the ORS, so it's actually got an ORS section that we can cite. That hasn't happened for 3395 yet. So if you're looking at this section, and this is chapter 1788, affordable housing. What page is it? 187. Yeah, 187 in your packet if you're scrolling through. Out of 330. Still scrolling, yeah. So, and I guess, again, it's up to you all if you want to talk more about that section or have any more questions about it. It is admittedly confusing, in part because we were, if you meet these criteria, you follow these standards.
You guys want to do this, or do you feel comfortable with where we're at, or?
I'm okay with where we're at.
Yeah,
I'm good.
okay. Okay.
Tired of it.
Yeah, well, I think I think what we have here, we've reviewed it with Kelly, we've reviewed it with the city attorney, we've gone over this a fair amount. I think we have it down the way that is required under the legislation, as well as where we had opportunities to be clearer about how this worked in the city of Sandy. We were able to put those parameters on there. So hopefully, if the applicants come in, with their attorneys, potentially, but it will at least make sense. There will be something, they won't just be walking up to the counter and going, okay, we're applying state law and that's all we have to go on, right? So we're hoping this gives your staff the guidance that they need to get them going on the right path.
So one question I have just on this project overall is obviously a lot of us are doing this because of change in case law and all that. But how often should what's best practice on reviewing and going through this exercise? Every 9 years, 5 years?
Time the legislator.
meets? Yeah.
Right, right. They certainly have been very active in land use planning. And so that has made it challenging. I think,
Yeah, so for a
all
couple of
years.
years, it may be all the time. But yeah,
I fear so. I would say, now that we have gone through, done the audit for clear and objective standards, and as provided that going forward, any changes that you adopt, keep that, you don't add discretionary standards to any of your residential housing types. That doesn't need to be revisited, right? So we should be able to say, okay, we've gone through, we've made those, right? So I would think your thoughts, we probably don't need to go back through that again.
I mean, I would say, I think, and I was just actually speaking to my staff about this last week, is I think moving forward, anytime we make changes to chapters that have kind of have implications on housing, I think it will probably be best practice to have the city attorney and potentially even like a third party group take a look at that.
at that chapter.
Correct. So at that time, I'd probably have somebody like MIG take a look at it. Because what I don't, my worst fear on this whole thing would be we start making changes to the code in the future on residential and it brings us back out of clear and objective. Yeah, exactly. that'd be a big step backwards.
Because
And
you can
just-
already tell it's clear and objective to us. It's different, it's different.
But just, I think just having another pair of eyes on it that, you know, they're subjective and they know new case law and new statutes like Kate and Kathy do. There, you know, if we would have done this process internally without hiring a consultant firm, well, for one, we would not even be halfway through it yet, but for two, there would have been so many things that I wouldn't have known because I'm just not as up to date on legislative changes as they are. So, and I will tell you on the legislative side, I would agree that they're going to be coming so quickly over the next few years. We're going to have to revisit it. But just so everybody on council and planning commission knows, there's a lot of legislation that's passed that we're not including or we're not proposing to include in our municipal code. The only things we're proposing to include on our municipal code is legislation where we have some local decision making still, which is few and far between now. But whenever they do give us some decision making still, we're deciding to incorporate that into our code.
Right.
So that you, as the policymakers, can decide where we want to head on that.
Can I ask a quick question about this whole process?
and then we'll go Kathleen.
So one of the reasons we're here is development causing us to buy additional roadway connections and stuff. And I flipped through it and I mean, I don't know. I would have thought the last one was pretty clear and objective, but obviously it wasn't. So I just want to make sure that our investment time is also paid so that infrastructure that's created from development will now be clear and objectively so that it will be paid for with development.
You know, it's impossible to say that that is 100% going to happen, but that's the hope of all these changes that will do that. I mean, until there's new case law to state otherwise, that, you know, you also have to make these code changes now. I do feel like we're in a pretty good, the best place that Sandy's ever been with our development code on making development pay for infrastructure. Yeah.
Make a graphic with the quote.
So we still have one big problem. And that is that on our zoning, you know, single family residential, low, medium and high dense residential zoning, it has minimum lot sizes of 7,500 in single family, 5 to 5,500 in low density. And then it has no minimums in the other zones, and it has maximum densities of 5.8 in single family, 8 in low, 14 in medium, and 20 in high. And what happened with Bull Run Terrace, that's what it's always been. You know, we do the little math on how many acres and how 8 times whatever the acres and all that, we get how many maximum units they can put there. But what's happened was with Bull Run Terrace, all of a sudden, when this duplex rule came along, and let me just clarify, duplexes were allowed everywhere except for single family. So when we said 8 units per acre on low density, that meant you could have 4 duplexes and 8 units, you know, 8 units per acre. You could have 4 duplexes per acre, basically, which is 8 units. And so what's happened though is with Bull Run Terrace, all of a sudden, the staff took the densities and doubled them. And so then it went to 12 units per acre for single family residential, 16 units for low density, 28 units per acre for medium density. And there was a reason why it didn't get changed on the high density, which is 20, but now our medium density is 28 units per acre and our high is 20, which is totally flipped, kind of weird. And the challenge that I see when we want it all clear and objective is that our code that y'all we're just going through still has those old numbers in it. And it doesn't have these double numbers. And the double numbers really only apply if you're doing duplexes. But I don't think our intent ever would, you know, we always allowed to have duplexes, but our intent isn't to allow twice the number. The original intent when we allowed duplexes before in a zone was that maximum density per acre. So this idea that all of a sudden we're doubling the density to 28 units per acre on medium density land is just, I mean, we don't allow that on multifamily high density apartments. So that's the one big, huge, that's kind of what messed us really, in my opinion, that's why I didn't vote for it on the full run proposal or whatever, Deer Point or whatever we called it, whatever it ended up being. But that's the big, huge problem loophole that we still need to close here. Because those guys because then all of a sudden it was 200 units per acre, or 200 units that they were allowed to have or something like that. And it got lost in the sauce about whether they were duplexes or single family or multifamily or anything else. And that's the huge loophole that we need to close.
You're just talking about the SFR where they split the, where they're able to split the lot.
No, I'm talking about every zone. Every zone, they have behind the scenes and not in our code, but they have basically doubled. If I come in and I say, okay, the code says I can have 8 units per acre, but I want to do duplexes. Oh, well, now you can do 16 units per acre there.
Yeah, it's,
About HB 2001.
yeah, it's the bill, it's not.
That's a legislative decision. That's not our code.
No, what the legislation said that we have to allow duplexes in every
Yes.
spot.
Right,
And
right.
yes, we did that. But it did not say that we have to double the density.
I'll let our city attorney speak to that.
And we do have and I reached out to this more. We have the ability to like reinstate minimum lot sizes. They have to be the same for duplexes and single family. But we can put some controls on this. And I think we need to before we finalize this clear and objective process. This is something that I brought up. Remember you all said, oh, go meet with them last year? Remember you said, go meet with the staff, and I met with everybody, and I talked to Ariel at LOC. I talked to Ethan Stockmeyer at DLCD and tried to kind of understand all this. So, yeah.
So with it, so I'll let Josh
Go
speak
ahead,
in a
sure.
second, but what House Bill 2001 said or says is that anywhere that you allow a single family home, you have to allow a duplex.
Right.
So we allow single family homes in our SFR, R1 and R2 zones. So in all 3 of those zones, we have to allow duplexes. And the density doubles because on each lot that has a single family home, we also have to allow a duplex.
We always allowed duplexes before on R1, R2, and R3, always allowed.
So
duplexes.
R3, the reason why the density is different there is because we don't allow single family homes. So you don't double it because we've never allowed single family homes. We went through this exercise when we adopted House Bill 2001 before the council and explained all this. I'll let Josh speak to the doubling. It's in the House Bill if he's still online.
174010, primary use is permitted outright, single detached, if located on an existing lot of record. Single detached 0 lot line, if located in conjunction with the planned development. Single attached 0 lot line. So we do allow it in high density. We did allow single family, so I don't understand about that one. And we have allowed duplexes in every zone, and we added it on to single family. But when we had it in there for R1, R2, and R3, we also had maximum densities. Now I understand there's also, I have the quotes from, Anyways,
Josh, can
Josh,
you
let's hear
speak to
from
that?
you.
Yeah, I mean, Kelly, I think you already answered it, that the issue is what House Bill 2001 changed and the key here is that you have to allow a duplex on every lot that you would allow a single family detached home. And so that doesn't allow you to, prior to House Bill 2001, you could apply your density restrictions and end up with the same number of total dwelling units, whether they're duplexes or single family detached. But now after House Bill 2001, you have to allow every lot that could have a single family detached can have a duplex, and that effectively allows for a doubling of the number of dwelling units because you have to apply the same rules to duplexes as you do to single family detached.
But we could, but the minimum lot sizes still can be implied, and I would direct you to OAR 6 Exhibit A.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to change lot sizes in a clear and objective audit, though. That would be an entirely different process that we'd be doing that in.
I'm not too excited about reducing lot sizes either.
Well-
I don't sure that, Kathleen, I don't know that we can do a whole lot about this thing because it is coming down from the state. one of those things that
So what's the number of maximum density then, Carl? I mean, that's where
It's
our
double
code
what-
says one thing and then, but off the record, it says something else. That's where it's not clear.
I think it is clear. If you allow a duplex on every single family residence
Well-
zone in 1 and 2.
Well, to
You're gonna
Kathleen, but to Kathleen's point, do we not need to change the figure of the maximum density since it has doubled?
You get in the way of, there's that same 2001 says you cannot put restrictions on.
But I'm not asking to put restrictions. I'm
Well-
just saying, shouldn't it reflect
No,
the
because
fact?
That'd be doubling it again.
You'd be doubling it
Oh,
again.
you'd be doubling it
Yeah.
again.
But-
Okay.
Yeah.
But there
sorry.
is some clarity that we can add to it, and I guess I want the opportunity to kind of sit down one more time
This isn't-
and see what we can do to get this loophole as constrained as possible. Because our intent, see, we always had duplexes allowed,
Mhm.
and we always had maximum units per acre on, say, R2.
You don't want to put that into our
Nope.
code because then you would end up with
It's already in
4
our code.
times as much.
No, it's already in our code. Our code always allowed 14 units per acre on R2, and they could be duplexes. It was always allowed that way. So,
So what you could look at rephrasing how you have the density section of your code written to make that clearer. It's not going to change the result. But I can't come up with it off the cuff, but I'm sure we could come up with some way with a footnote or something to explain that that's the number for single family detached, and if you put duplexes on each lot, it allows for doubling. We could probably come up with something if that's the concern. If the concern is about the density itself, then yes, you could look at changing minimum lot sizes, but that's there's a lot of other policy implications for that.
So Josh, if you, when we did House Bill 2001 with Chris Crane at Barry Elser and Hammond, we actually added that clause. It's in section 1730-20E. It says duplexes for the purpose of calculating maximum density, duplexes shall be counted the same as a single family residence.
it's under what section?
17. Yeah, that was already written with Chris or Spencer. I can't remember who. It
17
might have been
what?
Spencer.
1720E.
Yeah, 1730-20E.
I'm pulling that up.
That was a recent code addition with House Bill 2001. That was not in our code before.
All right.
Well, so what this allows basically, and I just want everybody to know, because I'm gonna be. It allows 28 units per acre, which equals lot sizes of 1,500 square feet per unit of a duplex. Okay, 28 units per acre.
Is that
Which
true?
is-
I mean,
Yes, it's true.
I'm asking the lawyer and the professional over here. I don't think it does.
I mean, I've yet to see anything that proposes something like that. So I don't know. It still have to meet all the other standards. So it still has to meet setbacks. It still has to meet parking regulations. It still has to meet all our other requirements. So I don't know what this, I would have to do a lot of calculations. I don't really want to do it on the spur of the moment here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the theoretical maximum. Right, a theoretical possible doubling. I think then, thanks for pointing out that section of the code, Kelly. That's exactly what I was saying that you could add for clarity. It looks like you already did that. So I don't know what more clarity you could get in the code if that's the concern, is just clarity.
All right, moving ahead. Further questions?
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you for the work in this. Really appreciate it.
Very complex.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, I also just continue to encourage, questions and dialogue back and forth with staff in between as well. Stuff is very confusing. There's a lot going on here. I don't think there's any problems with any member of council on dialoguing with staff and figuring some of this out. So with that, thank you everybody for your time. Thank you to all the planning commission members that showed up and participated in this. I know this comes to you next before it comes to us. So have fun in your discussion on this. With that, I will adjourn. Thank you, everyone.